Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia and this is my review of The Unknown Ajax by Georgette Heyer. And I'm very pleased with myself that I just managed to say both the author and the title correctly on the first go, and then I ruined it all by saying how pleased I am that I managed to say that on the first go. Anyway, this is a Georgette Heyer novel from 1959. And then I ruined it all by not being able to pronounce the word 1959. This is a Georgette Heyer novel from 1959 and it is the first one of her works that I have read. So I can't really compare it to her other books. I read this one because I specifically asked for recommendations for her works, and this was the most highly recommended. In particular, people recommended this to me because they said this one's quite light on romance. So I'll make sure that my next pick of hers is going to be one that's a bit heavier on the romance, because that is, after all, what she is best known for. This is a historical novel set in 1817, and it follows the Daracot family. In fact, it is set entirely at the Daracot family estate, grandly named Daracot Place. All of it starts off with the arrival of one Hugo Daracot, who is the heir to the estate, even though he is completely estranged from the rest of the family because his grandfather, Lord Daracot, disowned his son, Hugo's father, after his unfortunate marriage to a weaver's daughter. So we immediately get to know the paterfamilias, Lord Daracot, who is a grumpy, surly, arrogant, misogynistic older gentleman who lords over Daracot Place. He has favourites among his children and grandchildren, and everyone else he treats with absolute disrespect and discourtesy. And this grumpy old man has now invited pretty much all of his grandchildren to the family estate to meet the heir to the estate, Hugo, who has suddenly become heir by some other uncle's death. The circumstances are not important here. The point is, Hugo arrives at Daracot Place as a stranger and is confronted with the rest of his family, whom he now meets for the very first time. Hugo is from Yorkshire, and that is the main thing you need to know about him. He talks with a dialect, and he seems very down to earth in a sort of working class, getting stuck in kind of way. He's also enormously tall, hence the title of the book, and very physically imposing. But his personality is very sort of laid back and relaxed and funny. And the book is essentially about his relationship with his cousins, among whom is the protagonist slash female lead of the book, a young lady named Anthea. I know, as much as the author has laid down a lot of research about Regency time, I cannot think of any examples of Anthea being at all a common name in the 19th century. Anyway, Anthea is soon determined by her grandfather to be the wife of Hugo, whether she wants to or not, because if her grandfather already has to give his estate to this usurper from Yorkshire of all places, then the very least his granddaughter can be the lady of the house. Obviously she's not a fan of this and shenanigans ensue. Before I get into more details about this book, I want to mention the comparisons to Austen, Jane Austen, in case you weren't aware, that are often drawn when it comes to Georgette Heyer's work. And one glaring difference, other than obviously the book being very clearly of the 20th century rather than of the 19th century, but one huge difference that really struck me as I was reading this is that The Unknown Ajax has a lot more men in it, and that the story focuses on men in a way that none of Jane Austen's works do. I found that really interesting because, in particular, if you think of Georgette Heyer as a romance author, we have this idea that romance books focus primarily on women protagonists and their stories. But in this particular book, pretty much all of the interesting plot elements surround the male characters of the book. There is, of course, Hugo and his mysterious background, but there's also, I don't want to get spoilery in this review, but there is a sort of subplot involving some criminal activity that involves several of the male relatives and other male characters. It seems to be much more a man's world than Jane Austen's novels, if you know what I mean. Obviously, Jane Austen's novels are very much set in a man's world, but they concern primarily women, whereas this particular Georgette Heyer book doesn't. Even down to the fact that there aren't many named female characters compared to the male characters. And in fact, the only female character that really has a part in the story is Anthea. So that was one huge difference that actually surprised me. Just from the way that people talk about Georgette Heyer's books, I expected them to be similarly female focused to what Jane Austen's works are. So there is one difference. In a lot of the scenes are conversations between men. So there are many, many more scenes that involve just men than scenes that involve men and women. And there are very few scenes that involve just women. I didn't read it with that lens, but I do wonder if this book passes the Bechdel test. The characters, I think, are the most fun part of this book. They're all very fun. This is very comedy heavy, as well as having elements of romance and elements of drama and elements of thriller even in it. I think the foremost impression you get of this book is that this is a comedy. In the context of that, pretty much all the characters are caricatures. They are very overdrawn stereotypes of Regency people. Archetypes like the Regency dandy, or the grumpy aristocrat, or even the conscientious butler. All of these are overdrawn, but really fun to read about and really funny, and a lot of the comedy comes from them being such extreme versions of these particular archetypes. The most interesting character, by far, is the titular character, the unknown Ajax, or as he likes to be called by his friends, Hugo. I know. Georgette. What were you thinking with these names? Anyway, so Hugo is this outsider to the family. He comes in and is so different to any person that they have interacted with that he throws everything into chaos by his mere existence in this family. He's the kind of romantic hero that's very easy to like. Just like the book overall, really, he's very light-hearted, very easygoing, very casual. He's not brooding or morally grey or has any quality about him that would make him at all controversial, except that he's quite literally the female lead's first cousin. And I realised that marrying your first cousin in the early 19th century was no big deal. I can think of at least one Jane Austen book where the main romance is between first cousins. Clearly, the sort of ick factor of it to a 21st century reader wasn't there to a 19th century reader. However, this book is not from the 19th century. This book is from the 1950s. I just have to think that there are so many ways in which the author could have gotten around the first cousin thing while still maintaining the basic setup and premise of the book, but she didn't, so that's just something we'll all have to live with. There are so many ways in which she could have made the familial relationship between Anthea and Hugo a little less close, but she didn't. Anyway, let's talk about Anthea for a bit. She is the archetypal romantic heroine. She's as much a character stereotype as all of her cousins, except Hugo, who really is an interesting character in of himself. But Anthea is very clearly based on the heroine archetype of Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. Just like her, Anthea is headstrong, witty, she has a tense relationship with members of her family, and she has no inclination of letting her life decisions be based on what those around her want her to do. She has a sense of propriety that marks her out as a Regency heroine, but beyond that, she knows what she wants and she's confident in her opinions. You know the type. I don't have to explain much about her to you because you know exactly what sort of a character I'm talking about, and unfortunately that makes her a little bit bland, especially when compared to the sheer outrageous fun aspect that is her counterpart Hugo. As far as the plot goes, there are several different stories really that are told within this book. One is that of the grandfather having to come to terms with his heir, and another is, of course, the romance between Anthea and Hugo. Another one is the aforementioned criminal activity. There is something to do with smugglers. There is the story of one of the other grandchildren, whose name I can't remember. The young grandson, who's Anthea's younger brother, Richmond. Really, Georgette? What were you doing with these names? Richmond? Anyway, so Richmond, who's Anthea's younger brother, and his struggle to be independent and to find his own place as a man. So there's a lot of individual character stories, and a lot of the conflict arises from tension between all of those members of the family. It is very engaging throughout. It's very hilarious throughout, but it isn't in any way a unique or a twisty plot. Pretty much all of the twists were very easily foreseen by even as dumb a reader as myself. And I'm really not someone who's good at guessing twists and turns and figuring out whodunits and things like that. But even I could see the twists coming off a mile away. But that did not lessen my enjoyment of the book. I really liked it a whole lot, and it made me curious to read more of Georgette Heyer's work, and in particular to read more of her work that focuses on the romance, because I didn't see much of that in this book. No, I don't really spoil much when I say it ends in a marriage, but I want to see how she does these romantic tensions when she focuses more on them, because in this book, whenever the romantic tension was there, it was very well written, but it did get a little lost in the rest of this entirely chaotic book. So I can recommend The Unknown Ajax as a sort of very fun, light-hearted bit of Regency historical fiction. It doesn't take itself too seriously, it doesn't take the characters too seriously, and it's just a lovely, enjoyable read. It doesn't go too deep, but if you're not going into it with those expectations, then you'll have a great time with it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!